What is up, guys? We're going to be taking a look at this lab, forced OAuth profile linking. The idea behind this attack is that we link our OAuth profile with the victim's account, allowing us to log in via OAuth and take over the victim's account. Let's see how it works. Notice at the login page, we have the option for a regular login, or we can log in with social media via OAuth. For now, we're just going to use the regular login option with credentials Wiener Peter. We'll choose login. We can see our account page. Notice we have the option to attach a social profile. So we're going to associate our social media account, or our OAuth provider in this case, with our regular account by following this link, attach a social profile. Now, ordinarily, you'd then have to sign in with the social media provider. So username and password, username peter.wiener, password hotdog, and then we'd be taken to the confirmation page. Do we give permission for the app to access our OAuth information? Since I've already logged in previously, we immediately get the message, you have successfully linked your social media account. We'll choose continue. We've now attached our social profile to our regular account. Now, the upshot of this is if we log out, we can now log in with social media. Once again, we're still authenticated with the OAuth provider in the background, so no credentials required. In this case, we still have an active session. We head to my account. We can see that we're accessing Wiener's account. So we didn't use the regular username and password. We logged in via OAuth. So key takeaway, our social media account, our OAuth provider is linked with our regular account. The idea is if we can associate our social media account with the victim's account, we'll be able to log in to the victim's account via our social media provider. Now let's take a quick look at the flow of this in the background. So this green request here is a regular request to /my account. You can take a look at the page and you can see we have the option to attach a social media profile. Now, if we take a look at the HTML and we navigate to that link, we can get a feel for where it's sending us. So you can see it's sending us to the OAuth server. So we're leaving the web application /auth, and then we send some information such as the client ID for the web app, redirect URI, and notice that we're asking for a code. The idea is we retrieve a code from the OAuth provider. We can then give that code to the web app so that it can make requests to the OAuth provider on our behalf. We also have a scope parameter there. We're requesting OpenID access to the profile, and also access to the email. Now, something that should be included here ideally is a state parameter. Now, the state parameter is more or less identical to a cross-site request forgery token. The difference here is just the context. When we're talking about OAuth, we refer to it as a state parameter rather than a CSRF token, but they essentially do the same thing. So we log in with the OAuth provider if it's required, along with a confirmation box. But the end result of this interaction is that we get sent back to the web app. Take a look at this redirect link. So we're sent back to the web app /OAuth linking. And you can see as part of the query string, we have the code. Now that code is very important because it allows the web app to get access to the bearer token so it can then access resources on our behalf. In other words, you could say that this particular code represents our social media account. So let's say the victim was trying to attach a social media account to the web app, but they were using the wrong code. They were using our code instead of their code. They would end up attaching our social media account to their account on the web app. So the objective of the attack is to get this code into the victim's hands so that they use our code instead of their own code. So you can see this request now being made on the web app. We're sending the request to /OAuth linking along with the code that allows the web app to make the request to the OAuth provider in the background. Now, how does the web app know to associate it with our regular account? Well, we have the session ID. But let's say a victim was dispatching this request instead with our code. Obviously, the victim's browser would be including the victim's session cookie. So the idea is our code, our social media account, would become associated with the victim's account via their session cookie. So it essentially becomes a cross-site request forgery or session writing attack, as it's sometimes known. How do we typically protect against this? Well, we use a cross-site request forgery token, but as we discussed in the context of OAuth, this is instead going to be referred to as a state parameter. Notice in this case, there is no state parameter being used as part of this request, which is what makes it vulnerable to cross-site request forgery. Now, the only other hurdle that we need to jump over here is that this code is going to be single use. So the idea is that this is automatically being used by the web app as soon as we visit this root /OAuth linking along with our code. So once this HTTP request is made, this code is no longer valid for the web app to make that call to the OAuth provider in the background. So how do we get around this? We're going to have to intercept this request, grab the code. We can then use that as a cross-site request forgery attack. But since we never actually used the code, it will still be valid for the attack on the victim. Okay, so we're logged out, but we've turned on intercept in Burp Suite. So the idea is we're going to be manually forwarding these requests. So we click my account. We have to forward until we get to the login box. We know Peter. Log in, and you can see we just manually click forward until all of the requests have disappeared from the burp intercept output. So now we'll choose attach a social profile to forward the request. And you can see this request, the GET request, is the one that is going to be to /OAuth linking. We can see a code there. Now, because it's been captured by burp intercept, this has not been sent to the web app. So what we have is a live code here, which we can give to the victim. Remember, that code essentially represents our social media account. So if we can get the victim to use this as part of a call to /OAuth linking, then we're going to associate our social media with the victim's account. We can then take over the victim's account by logging in with social media. So we have the code. We're going to drop this particular request. We don't want it to be seen by the web app. So here we are now at the exploit server. Here's what the attack looks like. You can copy and paste a template from the Portswigger guidelines that are provided with the lab. We are loading up an iframe. We're setting the source to our vulnerable URL. So we're getting the victim's browser to visit OAuth linking, query string, code equals, followed by that one-time code that we've captured with burp interception. So as soon as the victim lands on the attacker-controlled domain, the victim's browser immediately dispatches this HTTP request to /OAuth linking along with our code and along with their session cookie. Now, of course, they are required to be authenticated with the web app for this attack to be successful. Because if they're not authenticated with the web app, then it's not going to associate our social media account with their web app account because they're not logged in. So there is a little bit of luck required. If you're persistent enough, eventually those conditions are going to be true. So let's store. Let's choose deliver exploit to victim. Now, the truth is we don't have any idea whether that's worked at this stage, and that's because we haven't solved the lab yet. The objective is to delete Carlos. And in order to do that, we need to log in as an admin. So hopefully now if we log in with social media, our social media is going to be linked to someone else's account. And you can see straight away this time when we've logged in with social media, we get access to the admin panel option. And if we head to my account, you can see our username is now administrator. So the idea is an admin has landed on the attacker controlled domain while authenticated with the web app. They've then dispatched that OAuth linking request along with our code. Our social media account has been linked with the admin's regular account. So now when we log in with social media, we're immediately presented with the administrator account. So now let's head to admin panel, and the objective is to delete Carlos. So as soon as we delete Carlos, we get the flag, congratulations, you solved the lab. So key mitigations here. This is obviously a flavor of cross-site request forgery attack. We mitigate these types of attack making use of a cross-site request forgery token. It's just that in the case of OAuth, it's referred to as a state parameter. So by implementing the state parameter, it becomes obvious to the web app when an OAuth linking request originates from an attacker-controlled domain rather than from the legitimate user. Now, there is a bit of a caveat here. It's also part of the design choice that made this particular vulnerability possible. Notice how we had the functionality where we could log in as a regular user and then link the social media account. That's not necessarily how OAuth always works. In some cases, we can just log in with our social media account directly. But this particular design choice also led to the vulnerability. So if you do see a setup like this where it's possible to create an account and then link social media or some kind of OAuth provider afterwards, the very next thing you should look for is make sure it's protected with a state parameter. Otherwise, it could be vulnerable to cross-site request forgery. All right, that's pretty much it for this lab. Thanks for checking out the content, and I'll see you guys in the next lab.